But who don't do this? Who doesn't do this? Verse 227. إِلَّا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, except those who believe. وَعَمِلُوا الصَّالِحَاتِ, they do good deeds. وَذَكَرُوا اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا, they remember Allah much. What else do these people do? The mu'mineen. وَانْتَصَرُوا مِنْ بَعْدِ مَا ظُلِمُوا, they defend themselves after they have been oppressed. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says amongst the qualities of the mu'mineen is what? That if you've been wronged, you are allowed to defend yourself. You are allowed to fight. You are allowed to stand up for yourself after you have been oppressed. So for someone to say that we cannot oppose a tyrant, a dictator, a king, a president, just because they are the ruler of a Muslim nation, or worse still, if they actually throw the Muslim world into chaos by actually working with the illegal Zionist regime, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us, no, we are allowed to be able to defend ourselves. We're allowed to stand up for our rights. There's another verse, chapter number 22, Surah Al-Hajj, verse number 39. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, أُذِنَ لِلَّذِينَ يُقَاتَلُونَ بِأَنَّهُمْ ظُلِمُوا, permission to fight is given to those upon whom war is made because they are oppressed. وَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَلَى نَصْرِهِمْ لَقَدِيرٌ, and most surely Allah is well able to assist people like that. Here, it's important for us to note that the verse that they use to say we have to obey a ruler, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us there are times when we are permitted to be able to fight, permitted to be able to defend ourselves. And those include things like when preserving Islam, things like when we preserve our life, when we preserve our honor, preserve our dignity. Therefore, the idea of Madkhalism as something that gives carte blanche to the dictators or the Arab kings of the world to do whatever they please is not justified or upheld by the ayat of the Quran itself. Number two, what are the ahadith that they rely upon from the school of thought of their ahadith and their tradition in order to be able to justify the idea that you are not allowed to be able to raise your voice, you're not allowed to be able to disassociate yourself, you're not allowed to be able to argue against the kings and the tyrants of this world. There are many narrations, but I'll mention a few in order to be able to give us some context. The first one is that they believe that the Prophet ﷺ on many occasions forbade people to rise up against the ruler of the time. And they have a few different narrators, but one in particular we will see in a few minutes has been particularly problematic in the way in which he has acted. One hadith comes to us, and this has been graded as Sahih by Allama al-Albani. Allama al-Albani is considered to be the most important scholar of hadith sciences in the Salafi world in the contemporary era. As we mentioned earlier, al-Albani was one of the three big scholars that endorsed Rabi' al-Madkhali. He cites this hadith, al-Albani cites this hadith, which he considers to be sahih from the Prophet ﷺ, who is narrated to have been said the following: listen to the ruler and obey him, even when it is hard for you. And when it is easy for you, whether you are pleased or displeased. And when others are given preference over you. And even when they consume your wealth wrongly, or they beat your back wrongly, even then you must obey the ruler of the time, according to a hadith attributed to whom? The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Many other narrations like this. Now there was one era when narrations of this sort started to become attributed to the Prophet and catch on like wildfire. Any guesses when in history narrations about obeying the ruler, irrespective of how pharaonic he is, started to catch on and were not found before then? This is very important. Hadith up until this period of this nature had not been in circulation, had not been talked about, had not been debated, had not been cited. And then all of a sudden narrations like this started popping up. Any idea when? Before Banu Abbas? During Banu Umayyah? Which time? Which caliph in particular? Yazid. Yes. As you know, Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi led a revolution against the tyrant of his time. And it was in the interest of those people who wanted to support Banu Umayyah, or worse still, justify the stance that they had taken with Yazid. Now, if you had wrongly, let's say, you had said, no, Yazid, we have to stick by him. Obviously, you've been given power or you've been given position by Yazid. So you want to be able to justify and keep his reign of terror. When a person like Sayyidi Shababi Ahlil Jannah raises his sword and his banner and then is martyred on the 10th of Muharram, and everyone comes to blame you for the stance that you took against Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, what's the only recourse you have? Well, the first recourse is to be honest. But if you can't be honest, what do? You falsify traditions and you attribute it to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which makes it sound like your stance with Yazid was right and your stance against Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was also right. Your stance against Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam was somehow right. Who do you think did this? Who created this fiction in the history? A particular person by the name of Abdullah ibn Umar al-Khattab. Abdullah, the son of whom? Umar ibn al-Khattab, created a whole group of ahadith citing the Prophet in order to justify his stance alongside whom? Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Some would argue the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Because you all know what Umar ibn al-Khattab did in his history to Fatima salamullahi alayha. So it's not unexpected for Abdullah ibn Umar ibn al-Khattab to do a stance against Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi. I'll read to you some narrations. When the people of Medina, so this is from Sahih al-Bukhari. This is from Sahih al-Bukhari. When the people of Medina dethroned Yazid bin Muawiyah, when they rose up against him, Abdullah ibn Umar gathered his close friends and children and said the following: I heard the Prophet saying, a flag will be fixed for every betrayer on the day of resurrection. Meaning whom? If you betray the caliph of your time, there is a sign for you that you betrayed the caliph on the day of judgment. A flag will be fixed for every betrayer on the day of resurrection. And we have given the oath of allegiance to this person Yazid in accordance with the conditions enjoined by Allah and His Apostle. And I do not know of anything more perfidious than fighting a person who has been given the oath of allegiance in accordance with the conditions enjoined upon him by Allah and the Apostle. So this person now has bay'ah shar'iyyah. The bay'ah to him is in accordance with the conditions of bay'ah set down by Islam itself. He continues, if ever I learn that any person among you has agreed to dethrone Yazid, to fight Yazid, to overthrow him, by giving the oath of allegiance to someone else, there will be separation between him and me. I will separate myself from the person who tries to dethrone Yazid ibn Muawiyah. So he tries to separate himself from whom? Imam al-Hussein salamullahi alayhi. Good luck with that. Muslim bin Hajjaj. This time hadith from Sahih Muslim. So I quoted to you from Sahih al-Bukhari before, this time Sahih al-Muslim. It has been reported from Abdullah ibn Umar, same person, that he paid a visit to Abdullah bin Muti' in the days when the atrocities were being perpetrated against the people of Medina at the event of Harra by Yazid ibn Muawiyah. You all remember when Yazid sacked Medina al-Munawwara. Ibn Muti' said, place a pillow for Abu Abdul Rahman, meaning Abdullah ibn Umar. Place a pillow, get him to sit down. But the latter said, I have not come to sit with you. I have come to tell you a tradition that I heard from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. I heard him say, one who withdraws his band from the obedience to the Amir will find no argument in his defense when he stands before Allah on the Day of Judgment, and one who dies without having bound himself to the allegiance of the Amir will die the death of the days of Jahiliyyah. So if you don't give bay'ah to Yazid and you die the death of Jahiliyyah. It becomes very problematic for Jamal Ahsant. Many other narrations of a similar vein. In brief, the reason as to why these narrations are not sound, not accepted, are many. But just to be able to mention in brief. Number one, they contradict the Quran. As we said earlier, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives you the right to defense. The right to be able to protect and preserve Islam if Islam is being trampled upon. This is a duty of the Muslim, irrespective of whom the caliph or the leader is of the time. More so, if Yazid's bay'ah or any ruler's bay'ah is in accordance with the Sharia just because they are the leader of the time, then by priority, Fir'aun's bay'ah was also legitimate. And Musa alayhi salam should have obeyed Fir'aun. Yet Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اذهب إلى فرعون إنه طغى. Go to Fir'aun, address him, free your people from him. Surely he has been tyrannical, inordinate over people. Number two, this hadith and these particular sorts of hadith were never mentioned before by any other ruler. Yazid himself never cited this as evidence of his bay'ah. Muawiyah never cited this in terms of his bay'ah. Imam al-Hasan alayhi salam didn't. Amir al-Mu'mineen alayhi salam didn't when people rose up against him. Who knows the traditions of the Prophet better? Abdullah ibn Umar, who wasn't a companion of the Prophet, a proper companion, a senior companion of the Prophet, or Ali ibn Abi Talib. When people rose against Ali ibn Abi Talib, salamullahi alayhi, he never used this hadith. He didn't say, the rulership of the caliph of the time is obedient on you because the Prophet said so, and that there will be a flag for you on the Day of Judgment if you go against it. He didn't cite this hadith. Neither did those before him. Uthman, people rose up against Uthman and killed him. He didn't say this hadith. No one said it at his time. Umar ibn Khattab, someone rose up against him and killed him. No one raised that. Abu Bakr, people rose up against Abu Bakr, correct? When he took over Khilafat, people rose up against him. Amir al-Mu'mineen rose up against him. Later on, those people who did not accept his allegiance, they rose up against him. They didn't pay him the taxes. He never cited this hadith. Number two, this hadith was never in circulation until whom? Abdullah ibn Umar. Many other reasons as to why the traditions are incorrect. The traditions between them have contradictions, and they are only stated by the supporters of Banu Umayyah during the time of Yazid ibn Muawiyah. Okay. So having understood that Madkhalism is born of these sorts of narrations, we would also have to then accept that Abdullah ibn Umar's stance was better than Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam's stance. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam rose up against the tyrant of his time. Abdullah ibn Umar says, you're not permitted to. if you're faced with the opinion of both of these two people, whom are you going to follow? Sayyidi Shababi Ahl Jannah or Ibn Umar? Now, despite this particular practice that entered into Islam at that time, it has continued until today and is used by a vast proportion of the Salafist movement in order to indoctrinate Muslims around the world that you are not permitted to be able to stand up against the tyrants of your time. Nay, even if those tyrants actually work with Israel, you have to be able to agree to that and also work with them, because the tyrant or the ruler of the time is given bay'ah shar'iyyan, a legitimate divine bay'ah. What's very interesting is that our seventh holy Imam, Musa al-Kadhim, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh, has a number of traditions which would undermine this particular ideology that I want to be able to mention, maybe just two of them, to honor Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam tonight. One hadith comes to us from the great companion by the name of Safwan al-Jammal. Safwan al-Jammal is Safwan who owns, sells and rents camels. So from the word Jamal. Al-Jammal is the one who sells, buys and rents camels. One day, Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam meets Safwan and says to him, I hear that you have rented many of your camels to the kafila of Harun al-Rashid. Harun al-Rashid was the caliph tyrant of the time during the 7th Imam's time, or one of the caliphs at the time. Safwan says, yes. But I've not done this out of sort of avarice or foolishness. It's not like I'm supporting him. It's not like I support the tyrant Harun al-Rashid. Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam responds, he says, Safwan, tell me, has he paid you? No, he hasn't paid me yet. When he returns from Hajj, he will pay me for all the number of camels that he and his group and his entire caravan have rented from. He says, tell me, so in that case, do you hope that he lives to be able to return and pay you? He said, yes, of course. I want him to live, I want him to return, I want him to pay me. He said, that there is the problem. The fact that you want the tyrant to live so that he can pay you, just that you want him to live and continue living, this is you wanting hope for him and continue on. This makes it as if you are siding with him. Just by you wanting him to live is enough for you in the sight of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be considered yourself as alongside with him, because you want him to be able to remain. Only then did the penny drop with Safwan al-Jammal, that how much, the extent of which you are supposed to be able to be away from and not want anything to do with, and not want these people to exist and create any turmoil on earth. Immediately, Safwan al-Jammal sold all of his business, such that when Harun al-Rashid returned, it was that Harun al-Rashid didn't owe Safwan al-Jammal the money, but owed the money to the new owner, that he didn't want anything to do with it. Harun al-Rashid said to him, tell me, why is it that you sold this business? Safwan, he made up a story out of taqiyya, and he said, you know, I've become very old. My mind has become very tired. My inability to look after an entire flock of camels. So I sold them. Harun al-Rashid said, no, I know that you've been talking to Imam Musa al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Had it not been that me and you have shared close companionship in the past, I would have killed you for you listening to Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Think about this very carefully, this hadith very carefully. From the perspective of Safwan al-Jammal, he considered himself to be opposed to the tyrant caliph. The tyrant caliph says, had me and you not been so close, all this time I would have killed you. Meaning, from the perspective of Harun al-Rashid, actually he was very close to Safwan. When he wants to speak good of a person, whom will he be speaking good of? Safwan. When he wants to recommend business to someone, who will he recommend you to? Safwan. Meaning what? It looks like the Caliph and a Shia of Ahlul Bayt alayhimus salam are very, very close with one another. You don't realize from your perspective, you think that you've disassociated from the tyrant of the time. From the perspective of the tyrant, he sees you as a friend. How interesting the hadith of the seventh Imam Musa al-Kadhim salawatullah wa salamuhu alayh. Last hadith from our seventh Imam alayhi salam in order to honor him tonight. And again, as a response to the ideas of Madkhalism. The hadith where he is narrated to have been asked. Companion said to the Imam alayhi salam, فَأَيُّ الْأَعْدَاءِ أَوْجَبُهُمْ مُجَاهَدَةً. Jihad and combat against which of the enemies is most obligatory? So there's obligatory and then there's most obligatory. You see, there's wajib and then there's ojab. There's wajib and ojab. Ojab is which is more obligatory than the other obligations. فَأَيُّ الْأَعْدَاءِ أَوْجَبُهُمْ مُجَاهَدَةً. Which of the enemies are we most obliged to war against? Interesting wording. So there are some enemies that it's wajib for you to be at war against, and there are some that it's ojab for you to be at war with. Imam alayhi salam responds, أَقْرَبُهُمْ إِلَيْكَ. The first group are those that are nearest to you. Geographically, proximately, most closest. If there's two enemies, one that's on your doorstep, one that's 1,000 miles away, which one is more obligatory for you to be at war with? Closest one, because it's on your doorstep. وَأَعْدَاهُمْ لَكَ. And the second awjab is the one who is the greater of the enemies to you. Whichever one is greater, the a'da'uhum lak, that's the one you're supposed to be at war with. Third, وَأَذَرَّهُمْ بِكَ. And the one that is doing the more harm out of the two, that is ojab for you to be able to be against. وَأَعْظَمُهُمْ لَكَ. And the greater of the two, in prowess, in might, that's the one that you need to confront first. وَأَخْفَاهُمْ لَكَ شَخْصًا مَعَ ذُنُوِّ مِنْكَ. And the greatest and the severest, and the one that is most hidden or concealed from you, that is the one that you need to be able to be most afraid of. The one that is more difficult for you to know that they're against you, you have to be able to find out against that one. Think about this. If Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam said that fighting against your enemy is wrong, or that you're not supposed to stand up against your enemy is wrong, Imam alayhi salam would not have said, it's not just wajib, but it's ojab. It is more wajib than wajib. It is the most wajib of the wajibat that you have to be able to do. Look at the logic that the Imam brings to it. If someone is more proximate to you, more dangerous to you, more concealed to you as an enemy, that's your first target. That's whom you have to be able to oppose more. Ahsant. The revolution, it's ojab for us to be able to defend it. Because with the loss of that, becomes the loss of all the rest of Islam around it. The idea behind tonight was to let you know that there is this sect of Salafism that is very present in the Muslim world, to help you understand the reason as to why it is there, where it hails from, and how it's in service of the enemies within Islam today, And how actually, when we often talk about how is it that certain Arab nations, Muslim countries justify their acts, now we actually understand where it comes from. It comes from this particular scholar by the name of al-Madkhali. And if you want to know its history, you have to go back to the event of Karbala and beyond and understand why Abdullah ibn Umar created his own subsect of Banu Umayyah in order to justify the rule of Yazid ibn Muawiyah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the hastening of Imam al-Mahdi alayhi salam, to allow us to be able to understand Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam better, and to help us to be able to apply his virtues, his edicts into our own life. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, whatever hajat that we have, Ya Allah, tonight, bihaqqi Baab-Ul-Ilm, we ask you, Ya Allah, accept those hajat, bihaqqi Imam al-Kadhim alayhi salam. Please conclude this discussion with 3 loud salawat in honor of our 7th Imam, Imam Musa al-Kadhim, salawatullah wa salamuhu alayhi. Please stand for ziyarat.